Hello everyone, welcome to Anime No Mi, and thank you for joining us for another One Piece video. During the Punk Hazard arc, Akainu had his first major confrontation with Aokiji. Both admirals were vying for the title of Fleet Admiral, so they battled each other with everything they had in order to obtain this highly acclaimed title. As we know, Akainu managed to get the victory, causing Aokiji to come out of this fight badly injured and losing part of a leg. However, we also wonder what could have happened if Kizaru had confronted Akainu in this fight instead, and what would be the outcome of that fight. So in today's video, we're going to talk about what would have happened if Kizaru had confronted Akainu instead of Aokiji, which of the two admirals would have been able to get the victory, and what this might have changed in the world of One Piece. But before we dive into the video, if you're new to the channel or even if you've watched a bunch of our videos, we'd be absolutely honored if you'd leave us a like, or even consider subscribing and maybe leave us a comment letting us know what you thought of the video. It really helps us out and motivates us to make more content. And if you'd like to help out the channel in a bigger way, consider sharing this video or your favorite with a friend. But without further ado, let's get into this video. So my friends, as we know, Akainu and Aokiji never ever really saw eye to eye, and they always had conflicting ideals and especially conflicting senses of justice. And after the Battle of the Best in Marineford, Sengoku would have liked to have seen Aokiji become the Fleet Admiral because his ideals were much more noble and worthy of the position. But the Marine advisors elected Akainu to be the next Fleet Admiral because of his great destructive force and strong belief in the ideals that the Marine follows, and as well as his kind of more no-nonsense sense of absolute justice. So for this reason, they chose Akainu to be Fleet Admiral over Aokiji. But Aokiji didn't agree with him becoming the Fleet Admiral, so he decided to confront him for a duel in Punk Hazard, and whoever won would get the title of Fleet Admiral without contest. Akainu obviously accepted the challenge, and so when they battled, the fight went on for days, relentlessly testing their bodies and taking them to the limit, to the point of their awakened Logia powers actually physically changing the entire environment of the island, turning it into a new landscape of ice and lava. At the end of the contest, Akainu came out victorious, making him the new Fleet Admiral. And then Aokiji decided to leave the Marines because he could not agree to follow the orders of someone like Akainu. After Akainu's ascension to Fleet Admiral, Kizaru became a confidant to share his advice, and often offered helpful advice, and was also someone for him to share his personal frustrations about the growing threat of piracy, especially when the pirates involved the Straw Hats. Now, Kizaru really has shown himself to be the closest thing that Akainu has to a friend among the Marines, being a person Akainu may actually trust the most. However, what if instead of confronting Aokiji, Admiral Akainu faced his most loyal companion, Kizaru? What might have changed in the story of One Piece? I mean, Akainu still remains an admiral, so let's think about what could happen. As we know, Kizaru is one of the laziest admirals, and he always appears to be really disinterested in the affairs of the Marines, although he still is incredibly loyal to the convictions of the Marine organization. Kizaru never seems to have wished to want a higher position than the one he holds, and it's for this reason he didn't get in between Akainu and Aokiji's battle to try and possess the chance to become the Fleet Admiral. He simply allowed these two admirals to fight for the title without interference. But what would happen if Kizaru had decided to confront Akainu in order to become Fleet Admiral? Like Akainu and Aokiji, Kizaru is a very powerful and strategic admiral during combat, where he's able to face powerful opponents quite easily, since he's even been able to confront Whitebeard without taking any damage or receiving any blows that would take his life. To say who would be the winner of this fight would be quite difficult to say because it kind of depends on how the plot lines and other situations that could lead to the victory and defeat of a character. So let's just base our ideas on what we know and what we've seen presented to us in the One Piece manga. Akainu generally has a great advantage against most enemies because of his lava element. You see, during his fight with Aokiji, this would have easily allowed Akainu to melt Aokiji's ice and then further burn his body, and possibly was the reason why he was able to remove his arm and leg. Kizaru, on the other hand, has the light element, which might make it a little more difficult to know if the light could resist Akainu's lava, so we can't be sure if Akainu would have the same advantage in combat as he did with Aokiji when fighting against Kizaru. We also want to bring up the fact that Kizaru possesses the ability to create a sword of light, and is himself a great swordsman, even managing to take on Rayleigh one-on-one in direct combat using a sword, and he held his own against the old man. Having this ability and skill level would allow him to maintain a certain and considerable distance to be able to take on Akainu without having to be directly next to him where he might be able to land one of his lava attacks on him, as well as the fact that he, with that distance, could land some very sharp blows on Akainu. Another reason for this close matchup between them is the fact that Akainu possesses great offensive power, being able to easily perforate any person or object, while Kizaru possesses an incredibly fast power, being impossible to dodge any of his light attacks, which makes it difficult to know the winner of this fight. But regardless of the outcome of this fight, both men would have probably remained in the Marines because of their ideals and singular kind of, or at least common sense of justice. So even if they'd lost, they would have stayed in the Marines to still punish the pirates. After all, Aokiji only left the Marines because he did not agree with Akainu's ideals and his sense of justice. But Akainu and Kizaru somehow have similar ideals. So even in a theoretical fight between the two of them, had Kizaru lost or Aokiji lost, both would probably stay in the Marines after that event. So let's just take a moment to imagine, what if Kizaru had won? Well, with Kizaru as Fleet Admiral, things might still be pretty much the same, but the Marines' sense of justice would be much less severe. You see, Kizaru doesn't have the same strong convictions of Akainu, and he would act in a much more calm and analytical way, unlike Akainu, who faithfully follows the Marines' convictions and almost brings more passion to the position. Akainu almost always acts in an aggressive way and really never cares about the consequences of his actions and what might happen afterwards. And it's this way that you could see that they may share a same ideology, but Akainu and Kizaru differ greatly in how they enact that sense of justice. As we saw in the battle between Akainu and Aokiji, they were able to completely change the environment of Punk Hazard. And after the battle ended, the island was surrounded by a sea of fire on one side and icebergs on the other. In the center, there's a hole where seawater flows, which separates the two halves of the island, and it happens to be homes for sharks. And this lake was originally a crater formed at the epicenter of the place where Akainu and Aokiji began their long fight. Although the aftermath of the duel left behind patches of burning water or frozen water in the lake, this hole seems to have its own special kinds of currents and has a strong wind that runs through it, and it really gives it an unusual and really quite different place from the other two masses of land. As mentioned by Robin, the extreme temperature differences between the ice and the magma led to an equally extreme difference in air pressure, forming huge gale force winds. These climate changes caused by Akainu and Aokiji made this island practically uninhabitable because of its two extremely divergent temperatures that cover each half of the island. The half of the island that Akainu was on became known as the Burning Lands, the hottest being the southwest half because of its excessive heat and active volcanoes that formed around it. This side of the island has unique features such as a sea of fire, full of lifeless fish bones and volcanoes and other various structures of fire and lava around that part of the island. And the heat of this place is so intense that it makes it impossible for ships to dock anywhere near the main pier. Due to the volcanic heat of the area, all of the buildings have melted and been deformed, and the streets are filled with lava pits. So there's only a few people who could ever move around this part of the island because of the very intense heat. Currently, only artificially created dragons and a few humans are able to go to this part of the island. But you really wouldn't want to stay on this side of the island anyway, and not for the fact that there are no structures, but this side of the island also contains poisonous gas. The other half of the island is known as the Iceland, and this of course is where Aokiji was at the beginning of the confrontation with Akainu, causing the northeastern half of the island to be transformed into a large area of ice. 4 years before the battle, this half was the area where the poison gas incident originated that spread to both sides of the island, causing the original inhabitants to flee. Since the duel, this half of the island has become a frozen region with gigantic ice mountains and freezing winds and surrounded by numerous icebergs that drift along in the sea, still remaining a habitable place but not really recommended because of the extremely low temperature. The Yeti Cool brothers even decided to live in this part of the island because of the low temperature really worked for them. Thus, they ended up becoming the guards under Caesar's orders. The Icelands also contain a harbor full of captured ships, and there is a river leading to the harbor that's usually blocked by icebergs, which also threaten to crush passing ships or anyone who's looking to get towards that side of the island. The icy lands are also home to several laboratories and underground facilities that were once used in chemical weapons research led by the world government's top scientist, Dr. Vegapunk. The laboratories stretch across the mountainside, although most of them have been destroyed by the fallout from the poison gas, and even fewer remained standing after the dueling admirals. So again, as we can see, Akainu and Aokiji's confrontation was able to completely change an island, changing in its scenery, its topography, and even the weather, turning it into a place with a totally unusual climate. However, in a confrontation of Akainu and Kizaru, the same just wouldn't happen since Kizaru's element doesn't really have the same property as Akainu or Aokiji's devil fruits. So in a fight between the two of them, the only one who would be able to change the landscape would be, of course, Akainu's power, causing weather changes and only one, or perhaps causing both, to turn into lava islands. But Kizaru might only cause destruction through his devil fruit of light, making the place totally hot because of the two intense fruit that are both capable of generating heat. So if the two powers were able to combine and even augment each other, Punk Hazard would have become an even hotter place than it currently is, making the island truly an impossible place to inhabit because of the immense amount of heat that no one could take. On top of that, it's likely that the island would have been totally destroyed because of Kizaru's power, because it's able to create immense destruction across a large area. And in this way, Punk Hazard would be a totally different place from what we know today. Well, with all that said, my friends, as we can see, a battle between Akainu and Kizaru could bring some very interesting possibilities to the world of One Piece. Not only just to have an interesting battle, but the way that the world may have changed and the tone of the world government if the other had taken over. If this were the battle to have taken place, it could have also prevented Aokiji from leaving the Marines, or at least from taking all of those drastic actions he took because of Akainu, causing the story to possibly be on a much different path than the one we know now. But now, we'd love to know what you think about it. Who do you think would come out between the battle of Akainu and Kizaru? And how do you think Punk Hazard would have changed? Also, do you think because Kizaru is made of light, do you think that the speed and his distance with the sword would have given him the advantage over Akainu? Let us know what you think in the comments below. So as we wrap up our video for the day, I want to thank you all so much for watching the video all the way up to the very end. Be sure you comment on any themes or ideas that you'd like to see in future videos. And also, since you made it this far, give us a like or hit that red subscribe button before you head out to take on the rest of your day. I really hope to see you all in our next video, and let's keep sailing this giant sea together. Take care.